CEO of LGB Alliance and the chair of LGB Alliance International, will join me to discuss this big moment for the organisation. Plus, Google admit what we all suspected: censorship under the Biden administration on YouTube. We'll give you all the details on that. And the one and only Andrew Doyle will join us from across the pond to discuss President Trump designating Antifa as a terrorist organisation. Plus, we'll be giving you an insight on the other free speech issues in the US. And of course, myself and my fantastic panel will be answering questions from our wonderful studio audience. Let's start with our first item, though. The government has announced mandatory digital ID for all those working in the UK. The Prime Minister has said that the new digital ID scheme will make it tougher to work in the UK illegally in a desperate attempt to crack down on illegal immigration. This move has sparked fierce backlash with concerns about mass surveillance, privacy and state control. Cross-party opponents have been united in their criticism of the plan, and a petition opposing digital ID cards has been signed by a whopping 2.2 million people. So, is digital ID a serious infringement on our freedom? To debate this, I am joined by the Associate Professor at UCL, Dr. Melanie Garson, and Director of the Academy of Ideas, Alastair. Donald, thank you very much. Melanie, I'm going to start with you. Actually, polling across the UK suggests this is actually quite an even number of people are pro and against it, but the people who are very much against it are very against it. Do you understand their concerns?
I absolutely do understand their concerns, but I think that many of their concerns might be, in particular, with the framing of the issue, the timing of the issue, and the who of the issue. That's all of it. Well, no, I think the concept, rather than understand, I think what's happened is, with it being framed as part of the migrant crisis, and with it being framed as, you know, at the moment with this particular sort of government and leader that seems to be in trouble, and sort of the timing of it, that actually a lot of the benefits of digital ID, which you say that the 50% of the country can kind of see, are being lost in the narrative, because there are huge amounts of benefits to it, which, you know, I'm happy to...
Well, no, let's get back to that. And in fact, I think you're right, and you might agree with this, Alastair, is that there are sort of two debates here. One is about digital ID, but one is about the usefulness of it to curtail illegal migration. And that seems to be a very loose connection. I think a lot of people think it's just got nothing to do with it and it's not going to make any impact. It certainly hasn't in Europe, where they have still, many of the countries do have digital ID, and they've got a big problem with illegal immigration.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's interesting that it seems digital ID, or ID cards in general, seems to have been a cause for, 20 years or so. And the cause is always there, but the justifications for introducing it seem to change at any time according to whatever particular problem we want to justify the introduction by. So that makes you suspicious to start with, I think. I think the idea that they'll control migration or help with border control is for the birds, I think. I cannot see how that can possibly be the case. As you say, other countries have already got them, and it hasn't made much of a difference there. The things that I think would make a difference in terms of migration are properly understanding what a citizen is to start with, and who the people are that should be in this country, and then having sorting out a border force that can actually secure the borders. I mean, they would be the things that would make a really big difference. And it seems that the government, stripped of purpose and ideas as to how to deal with some of those very real problems, seizes on something like ID cards as a kind of catch-all solution to the problem, and it just
today.
Yeah, especially as employers are already under obligation to check people's work status and visas anyway. So this is an extra. So look, let's take away the immigration argument. Let's talk about digital ID in and of itself. What do you think, Melanie, are the benefits then?
Well, I think there's a huge amount of benefit from having a single source of truth that can tell you what your status is, your identity is, that can link you across the multiple government websites that we're all having to log into the whole time, and actually reduce the amount of information you have to share with people. One of the primary concerns people say, well, I'm sharing my information with government. You're sharing that information with all sorts of apps and sources. If you want to get a job, anywhere today, you have to submit your passport, you have to submit 3 bills, you have to submit all sorts of information into a private source, which could get hacked just as easily, and we're seeing that all the time, where this would allow you to narrow that down, use one single source of truth, and actually have much more control over the amount of information you share with people.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned control, because I think the main argument that goes against that is the governmental control because we've seen it. I know people mention Estonia and they say, well, they've got it over there and it seems to work. But of course, another country that has it is China.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we're necessarily in a China social credit.
You're watching
system.
the wrong TV show, mate.
No, I mean, we don't need to blow this out of proportion to be able to recognise the problem that it does represent. I think it's interesting that the defence of it says that there'll only be a very limited amount of information that you have to submit to get one of these cards. But already, according to the government, there's the possibility of expanding it to link with things like childcare and welfare and various other different aspects of the way that the government wants to run society. So you think, well, OK, there might be a limited amount of information that goes into the card itself, but then it'll be linked to all of these other systems. And then you got to ask, well, what's the government's record in terms of keeping that information secure? I mean, this is a government that only a few months ago we found out had sent the name of all the Afghan people who had acted as in some way to help Britain in Afghanistan. It had spewed that out into released that information into the virtual world. So even on that level, a very important thing, it can't be trusted, it would seem, to take care of information. And there's just a litany over the last 10 years or 20 years of situations where it's tried to introduce digital systems, often completely failing, very expensive, and ultimately you think, well, the government hasn't really got the capacity to do this in any reasonable way.
Well, that's it. I mean, what do you say to that, Melanie? Because that's what a lot of people are saying. If you look at something like when they tried to centralise the NHS account and digitise that, I think they spent about 10 billion on it, and in the end they abandoned it. It's just wasted money. So do you think the government, is this all for show anyway? Because it just doesn't look like the government would ever actually be able to implement it? I
think that is part of the problem of what we're seeing right now, is like this clear implementation plan. The reality is, implemented well, and in countries like, we talk about Estonia, Sweden, Norway, Portugal, Spain. There's lots of countries that have it. But, I mean, it's projected to save over £1 billion in fraud, in that system. So money that can go into...
But in Sweden, they've implemented it and fraud's actually gone up. Sorry, I did a bit of research. I apologise.
Well, those were statistics based on what it could do in the UK. So, I mean, it's, the system is entirely perfect. But I think the implementation, when we look at, you'd say about the Afghan data, well, that was a decrypted Excel file that someone sent. All this data, and this is where we look at the implementation, would have to be, clear thinking with proper cybersecurity in place, with really thinking about where the data is decentralized, how there's lots of technological mechanisms for sharing that in a safe way today. Having that clear roadmap obviously is what people require for comfort. But right now we have a major hack going on where a nursery chain has been hacked. We've got children's photographs and data being shared by malicious actors. That could be stopped by having a slightly, if you want to do a digital ID where information is shared, and that is not available for hackers to get to. So it requires different levels of security in different places.
But then, like you say, bringing something like having this digital ID applied to nurseries, that already feels like an overreach. If it's just meant to come in to deal with people getting permission to work here, even if they start having pictures of our kids on this digital ID or access to nurseries, already it feels like overreach and exactly what people are scared about, where it comes in on supposedly a sort of a limited remit and then quickly expands.
Yeah, well, overreach, but ultimately a completely and utterly dysfunctional state that we live under just now, who seems to have little capacity to run anything in the way that it should be run. So I think that would be a concern. But I do ultimately think that it's more that it signifies an entirely different relationship between the state and the people that live in this country, the citizens. Because if you have a citizenry that's confident, that knows its place, that feels a member of a country, that actively contributes in so many ways, then I think that becomes a different situation, and perhaps somewhere along the line, some sort of digital national insurance system, effectively, that might be okay. But we would live in far from that situation just now. We live in a situation where, as I say, the state is dysfunctional. It has little confidence in the people that it rules over. In fact, it often actively despises them. And so that kind of system that's been suggested suggests a kind of top-down organising of the citizenry rather than for our benefit. And I think that's the real problem.
Yes, absolutely. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to send mentally to people's phones at home what I think about this particular debate. So you should be getting a ping in just 1 second. In the meantime, thank you very much to Associate Professor at UCL, Dr. Melanie Garson, and the Director of the Academy of Ideas. By the way, the Battle of Ideas coming up in 2 weeks, is it?
Coming up on the 18th and 19th of October, and featuring a debate on digital ID.
Indeed,
with
we'll be
Labour together
there
and together, battling it out.
Alastair Donnell, thank you so much.